Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast has evolved over the 5+ years since it first launched. From now on, I'm going to be talking about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. And also mindset, of course, but mindset of all kinds, not just business mindset. I think. Things are changing for me, as you may have noticed if you've been following me online or listening to this podcast, so anything goes here. I hope you stay along for the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today, and now let's get into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 311. This is your host, Holly Worton, and I'm back with another solo episode. Today, I am talking about personal responsibility. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and it's something that really bothers me when I see it in other people, not because they're offending me or upsetting me, but just because I know how different life can be when we start taking responsibility for our own lives and start taking responsibility for our own shit. I see a lot of people not doing that online, and it just makes me sad for them. So I thought this was something that was worth talking about, and I hope you find this episode interesting and useful. I'm going to be talking about what is personal responsibility and why it's important. I'm going to talk about how this can be a problem and where this problem shows up in our lives, how to know when we need to pay more attention to this, what it looks like when we're not taking responsibility for our lives, who we really need to be responsible for, what are the limits of our responsibility. I talk about how to quit blaming others, stop feeling like a victim, and start taking responsibility for ourselves, specifically different ways that we can start bringing more elements of personal responsibility into our lives. This is life-changing stuff, so I hope you find this interesting and useful, and I hope that it's something that will be life-changing for you as well. I think that no matter how self-aware we are, I think there are always ways that we can improve in probably all areas of our lives, but also this area. I think it's really important to reevaluate how responsible we're being in different areas of our lives. And as I did last week, I will be providing you with a wheel of personal responsibility so you can figure this out for yourself and evaluate how much responsibility you're taking for the different areas of your life. I hope you find that tool useful. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to invite you to join me on Patreon. If you get value from this podcast, I would love to have you in the Patreon community to support this show and make sure that it continues to happen. If you head to patreon.com/Holly Worton, that's PATREON/Holly Worton, you can join me there. Membership starts at just $1 a month, and you get exclusive access to content I don't share anywhere else, including a monthly Q&A and done-for-you mindset work, depending on what tier you sign up at. So I would love to see you over there. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. So, personal responsibility. What is it? Personal responsibility or individual responsibility is the idea or the concept that people choose, instigate, or otherwise cause their own actions. It's the idea that we are responsible for our own actions and reactions, our intentions, our attentions, our priorities, our attitudes, the things that we choose to focus on, our emotions and feelings, our choices and decisions, our thoughts and beliefs, and how we respond to the problems and the challenges in our lives. It's a huge topic. It's a huge area. And I think it's very, very important because it's very empowering to step into a role of personal responsibility and recognize that we are responsible for all these areas of our lives. I think it's incredibly empowering. And people that don't take responsibility for these things often have a very strong sense of victim mentality. They might blame other people. They might feel like certain circumstances in their lives are creating the situation. And it can be kind of a downward spiral into feeling stuck and frustrated and powerless to change our lives and to experience the things that we want to experience. So by flipping that coin to the other side and choosing personal responsibility, it's absolutely empowering. And it gives us the opportunity to actually make the changes we need to make to create the lives that we want to have. So where does this show up in our lives? As I said, when we're not taking responsibility for our lives and our decisions, we might often see ourselves blaming other people, whether it's family members, authority figures, friends, situations, the current economic climate, politics, things for the crappy things that we're experiencing in our lives. If we start to notice that we're complaining about a lot of things, complaining about other people, complaining about situations, complaining about our jobs, our relationships, money, complaining about just anything, it's worth kind of stopping and taking the time to look at that. So, I'm a big fan of journaling because I think it's really useful to get stuff out of our heads and onto paper or onto file on your computer where you can look at the stuff and see it. Otherwise, it's really easy to have just a jumble of crap in our minds. So if you've got your journal to hand, you might want to pause this and think, like, where in your life are you complaining a lot? Like, what have you been complaining about? Make a list. What people, things, situations have you been blaming for circumstances in your life? And I recognize that this can be kind of a tough thing to acknowledge because we don't want to be seen as complainers. We don't want to be seen as people who blame other people for things. But we do it. That's just a natural part of life. I don't think there's anyone out there who has never blamed anyone or complained about anything. So, this is perfectly normal. And if it's something that you don't like about yourself, if it's something that you want to change about yourself, then get this stuff out of your head and onto paper where you can look at it. Don't blame yourself for this, since we're talking about blame. Like, this is totally natural. So get the stuff out of your head, get it onto paper or onto a file onto your computer where you can see it and just be clear about what's been going on for you. So personal responsibility is really important because it's taking responsibility for our stuff. The only person we really need to be responsible for is ourselves. And of course, if you have children, you're responsible for your children. You're responsible for your pets. You're responsible for any dependence that you might have on you. So we're not going to be talking about that because it's obvious that you're responsible for your pets, your children, and any dependents. That's a whole different conversation that I'm not going to get into. In terms of personal responsibility, we're talking about being responsible for ourselves. These are kind of the limits. That's the limit of personal responsibility. It's taking responsibility for us as individuals. You might often see other people taking responsibility for other adults, giving unasked for advice, criticizing their decisions, warning them about, doing or not doing something. And that's taking responsibility for other adults. And that's something that we want to avoid. And that can be challenging. Sometimes we care about the people in our lives and we want the best for them, or we want what we think is best for them. And we don't allow them, or we try to prohibit them from making their own decisions when we disagree with them. There are many times that we disagree with the choices, the decisions, the actions that friends and family members make, but they're adults. We need to allow them to make their own decisions. And if they ask for our opinion, yes, of course, give them. But you may have noticed that unasked for opinions are often not welcomed. And that's because I think at some level we all realize that we need to make our own mistakes. And sometimes that's the best way for us to learn, is by making a mistake and learning from that mistake. So it's really, really important to let go of the habit of taking responsibility for other adults in our lives. Again, if you have vulnerable people in your lives that are adults, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about taking responsibility for someone, adult family member with a learning disability. I'm talking about fully functional adults that can take care of their own lives, even when they make decisions that we're not happy with. So maybe pause this and make a list. Who have you been giving unasked for advice to? Who have you been criticizing their decisions, their opinions, their actions, their emotions, their choices in life. Think about that. And think about whether or not you're willing to let go of taking responsibility for these adults in your life. So, as I said, I think taking responsibility for ourselves and only ourselves, and not for the other adults in our life, is really, really empowering. Because that's how we create the life that we want to live. That's how we achieve joy and happiness in life. But the flip side of the coin is that disempowering victim mentality. And I see this all the time, particularly online, engaging with people that I don't necessarily know on online communities. And it's really sad for me when I see it, because I realize how they've given their power away to other people, other situations, beliefs, and they're not living the lives that they want because they're blaming other people and situations. So, how to quit blaming others, how to stop feeling like a victim, how to start taking responsibility for ourselves. Download that wheel of personal responsibility that I've created for you. I think you'll find it really interesting and useful, and it's a good way to see where you're at right now. So with that wheel of personal responsibility, I look at a number of different categories. So look at where you are on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of your attitudes. Like, what are your attitudes towards life and other people? Are they empowering or are they disempowering? Like, do you feel like everyone else has better luck than you do and you never manage to get anything right? And what are your attitudes in life? Like, are they enhancing your life? Are they empowering or are they disempowering? And how much do you take responsibility for your attitudes? Like, do you own your attitudes? Are you aware that you're responsible for your attitudes? Next is feelings and emotions. You often hear people say, oh, you made me feel sad, or you made me feel angry. Not exactly. The other person did something or reacted or acted in a certain way, and as a result, you felt happy, angry, sad, whatever. But your feelings and emotions are yours. There are many ways that you could choose to react, or there are many ways that you could react to a certain action or situation. And not everyone's going to react the same to a particular action or situation. So taking responsibility for our feelings and emotions is really, really important. Not everyone reacts the same way to every situation, and there are a variety of ways that we can feel about something that someone else has done. No one can make us feel in any way. People do things and we respond with a certain feeling or emotion. And I think it's really important to take responsibility for our feelings. Next is our choices and decisions. You know, a lot of times you'll hear people say, oh, well, I didn't have a choice. But there's always a choice. Like, I can't think of a situation where there's no choice. Sometimes we don't like the other choice, we don't like the other option, and so we make a certain decision. But there's pretty much always another choice, even if we didn't like it. And I think owning that and saying, you know, look, I didn't like this choice that I made, but the other option was even worse. You had a choice. You could have chosen that other horrible thing, but it was horrible, so you didn't. So even though you don't like the choice that you made, the other option was worse. Own that. Take responsibility for that. You had a choice. You had other options. You probably had at least one other option, but you didn't like it, and that's fine. Sometimes all of the options are shitty, and we have to pick the least shitty option. That's fine. I mean, that's not great, but own that. Like, take responsibility for the fact that you made a choice that you didn't like because the other options were worse. You always have choices. Next is thoughts and beliefs. Do you take responsibility for your thoughts and beliefs? Now, I talk a lot about mindset here. We are responsible for our own mindset. We are responsible for the thoughts and beliefs that we have. If we do not have enhancing, empowering beliefs, if our minds are just full of crappy, limiting beliefs, we need to take responsibility for those beliefs and change them. There are plenty of tools online, plenty of tools that you can learn offline that you can use to change your thoughts and beliefs. We are responsible for our own beliefs, but oftentimes We accept our beliefs as fact. We think they're fact. We think that's just the way it is. And that's not the case. So how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much responsibility do you take for your thoughts and beliefs? Do you just accept them as fact? Or do you say, look, I created this belief. I can change this belief. And if you don't know how to change your beliefs, ask me or Google it, or there are plenty of techniques out there to change your beliefs. One of them is Psych-K. I'm always talking about that because I think it's super easy to use. Yes, you have to pay for a course and invest 3 days of your time to take the basic workshop, but that's life-changing. It's going to change your life and it's going to change your ability to create the life that you want. The next category I've got here is problems, challenges. When you have problems in your life, when you have challenges, do you take responsibility for them? Or do you think, oh God, I'm stuck with this? Or someone got me in this situation? Or this is someone else's fault? Or something's fault? The problems we have in our life are so much easier to deal with when we take responsibility for them. And sometimes, yes, sometimes other people, other situations can instigate the problems that we have, but we are responsible for finding the solutions. We are responsible for finding ways around the challenges and the problems that we have in our lives so that we can dissolve those problems and do the things we want to do and achieve the things we want to achieve. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how much responsibility do you take for the problems in your life and finding solutions for them? Next is our actions and reactions. We are absolutely responsible for our actions that we take and the ways that we react to circumstances, people, things in our lives. So this kind of overlaps with choices and decisions, and kind of feelings and emotions, but I think it's worth having as a standalone category. So how much responsibility do you take for your own actions? Do you say, oh no, so-and-so made me do it. I had no choice. This is the way it is. Do you take responsibility for your actions and your reactions? Next is our intentions. People always say, oh, well, my intentions were good. But were they? And did you clearly form your intention before saying something or doing something? Were you clear in your intentions? Sometimes we just do stuff without even really thinking why we're doing them, or we say things without thinking why we're saying them. It's really, really important to be clear on our intentions and take responsibility for our intentions. And the last one is priorities. So we all set priorities in our lives and we all take actions based on the things that we consider to be priorities. Unfortunately, again, a lot of times we just kind of go with the flow and don't let things happen, and then we're not very happy with the results. So it's important to be clear on what the priorities are in our lives and take actions accordingly. So how much responsibility do you take for the priorities in your life? Do you make self-care a priority? Do you make health and well-being a priority? Look at the different areas of your life and think about how much responsibility you take for making certain things a priority. So I think doing this wheel and ranking these areas is really important because it gives us a feel for where we are today. And it's okay if your numbers are low. It's okay if you're not really taking responsibility for things in your life because now you know where you stand and now you can make different decisions. Now you can make different choices. Now you can make the choice to take personal responsibility and be responsible for your intentions, your attitudes, your focus, your feelings, your reactions, your actions, your choices, your decision, all that stuff. So that's the first place. So that will give you an idea of where you are. Now, as I said earlier, take a look at where you're blaming other people, things, and situations. So now that you've made that list, and if you haven't, pause this and make that list. Look at who, what you've been blaming and stop it. Instead, take a look at how you've co-created this situation, because even if someone else is involved, you have co-created this situation with them and you're partly responsible for it. So take responsibility for your part of the situation or the relationship or whatever and find a solution. Like, what is one thing you could do to turn that situation around or turn that relationship around? And then do that thing. So focus on what you've currently got, shitty situation, crappy relationship, and think about what you would rather have instead. And then take action to get that, to walk the path to achieve that. I'd also talked earlier about complaining, and hopefully you've made a list of things that you've been complaining about. Same thing. What would you rather have instead? Turn that situation on its head and find a solution. Take one action that will get you to the thing that you want. Because the thing about blaming other people and complaining about things, that's keeping you focused on what you don't want. And you need to change that around and focus on what you do want, because that will help you find a solution. So this is all about focusing on what you want and taking action to create the life that's right for you. If you have other people in your life that are taking responsibility for your life and are giving you unasked for opinions and advice and criticizing you, you need to set boundaries. And I've done at least one episode on boundaries, and I will include that in the show notes once I look for it. But set boundaries, because in the same way that you should not be taking responsibility for other adults, you should also not be allowing other adults to take responsibility for you. And I'm aware that I just said should and should twice, but you know what I mean. If you want to be taking responsibility for your life and living the life that you want, it would benefit you to let go of taking responsibility for other adults and set boundaries and uphold boundaries so that other people do not do this to you. Finally, I think it's really important that you need to give yourself permission to live your life. Again, lots of times other people, friends, family members, sometimes good intentions, sometimes not, will meddle in our lives. They will tell you what they think you should be doing. Again, set boundaries, uphold your boundaries, and give yourself permission to do the things you want to do, to take the actions you want to take, to make the decisions you want to make, to find the solutions to the problems that are right for you. Ultimately, this is about you living your best life. Now, if you're in a shitty situation, whether it's an abusive relationship or you're just really feeling down, I get that. You can't change everything in one day. What you can do is take one step at a time. So if you've done the work that I suggested in this episode and you've journaled on the stuff and you've turned the stuff around and you've made a list of things that you could do, don't feel like you need to add 97 things to your to-do list. Pick one, do it, and then when you have the time or when you can make the time, do the second thing, and then just step by step, you'll be taking charge of your own life, improving the things that you want to improve, taking the actions that you want to take to live the life that you want. This is super, super empowering. And be aware from now on of any times when you see yourself complaining or you see yourself feeling like a victim, and stop it and think about how you can turn the situation around. Again, one of the worst scenarios I can think of is an abusive relationship. I have been there. It is horrible. I know what it's like. It's horrible, 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 horrible. And I felt like there was no way out, and I felt like there was no solution, and I felt like I was just stuck there forever, and the only way out, I thought at one point, was to kill myself. Thankfully, I didn't do that, but that was the only solution I could see. So when life is overwhelming, stop, journal about it, pick apart the crap, flip it on its head, and see what you can do to change it. Be aware when you start feeling like a victim, or when you start feeling like the world is just crapping on you, or you feel like you just can't. Stop it, journal about it, pick the problem apart, focus on what you want instead, and do one thing that will take you towards that. It's incredibly empowering to take action towards the things that we want, and it's just incredibly empowering to take personal responsibility for our lives, because ultimately we are the only ones in charge of our own lives. So I hope you found this episode interesting and useful, and I welcome any questions or thoughts that you may have. This is just a quick half-hour episode, so I'm sure there might have been some things that I've forgotten in my research and notes for what I wanted to say. So let me know. If you have any thoughts, I would love to share them. So drop me a line, let me know what you thought. You can email me at holly@hollyworton.com or find me online and get in touch there. Next week's episode is probably going to be another solo episode, but again, I'm not quite sure what I'll be talking about because these topics always seem to be stuff that I'm thinking about, stuff that's on my mind, and they're quite timely. So you will find out next week what I'll be talking about. So that's all for now. Have a great week. Please take responsibility for your life as much as you can, and be aware when you're not doing it so you can take more responsibility. And again, this is not about blame. This is not about blaming yourself. It's just about taking responsibility for the decisions that we've made to get ourselves where we are today so that we can make different decisions to get ourselves where we want to be. Thank you. And remember to visit hollyworton.com/311 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you for listening. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollyworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.